Vern, there's something on your neck. Yeah, right. I'm not falling for that one a chance.
No, Vern, there is something on your neck.
It's a leech.
Leeches! Oh, my God!
Back in 1986, a movie about four boys walking along the railroad tracks hit theaters looking like a simple Hollywood coming-of-age story, but the truth behind it was much crazier. Stand By Me tells the story of a group of friends who set out to find the body of a missing teenager and accidentally embark on a journey that changes the way they see themselves and the world around them. But what most audiences don't realize is just how real everything behind the scenes became. Rob Reiner didn't just stage the emotions, he directly tapped into the actors' personal experiences to create genuine reactions in front of the camera. River Phoenix didn't just play Chris Chambers, he maintained the character's psychological state throughout the entire filming process. The dangerous scenes were shot with real locations, real trains, and no clear protective layers in the frame. The dialogues were not entirely based on the script, but reflected the actors' own thoughts and personal experiences right at the moment of shooting. But that was only the beginning. From controversial filmmaking methods to little-known behind-the-scenes details, this movie contains many remarkable truths. So today, let's explore the 20 least-known facts about Stand By Me. Number 20. The central content of Stand By Me revolves around the search for the body of a teenager, an element rarely placed as the main axis in films with a cast of children. And this created a clear risk of censorship right from the release stage. The story not only mentions death but also directly leads to approaching and observing the body, with the discovery scene staged in detail and not completely avoiding the image. This content was considered sensitive in many rating systems, especially when involving minors and placed in a context without horror or sensational elements to reduce the impact. Some release territories considered applying a higher age restriction than originally expected due to concerns about how young audiences would receive the images and the theme. During the release preparation process, the producers had to adjust the level of depiction to maintain the realism of the story without exceeding the limits allowed by censorship bodies. Some camera angles were carefully chosen to control the level of detail of the body, avoiding overly direct description while still keeping the clarity of the situation. The sound and editing rhythm in this scene were also controlled to avoid creating a feeling of overly exploiting shocking elements. The movie did not use fast-cutting techniques or complete obscuring, but kept the image at a recognizable level without holding it too long in the frame. This balance allowed the film to be widely released without cutting the entire important scene while still meeting classification requirements in many different markets. Number 19. Some scenes in Stand By Me were shot with a high level of realism, creating direct psychological impact on the young cast during filming. The content of the movie includes heavy themes such as death, domestic violence, and abandonment, elements that were not common in projects with young actors at that time. The scene where the body of the boy Ray Brower is discovered was staged with detailed imagery, not completely hiding the state of the body, and was shot at an outdoor location with a natural setting to maintain authenticity. The young actors participating in this scene had to directly approach imagery designed to resemble a real corpse, rather than using evasive camera angles or softening the details. Some actors in the group had never worked with content related to death or loss at that level before. The reactions in the scene, including silence, changes in facial expression, and slowed movement, appeared right at the moment of contact with the image without needing to be repeated many times. Throughout the filming of scenes involving heavy themes, the crew did not arrange a psychologist on set and had no official procedure to prepare or provide psychological support for the actors after completing the scenes. The actors continued to participate in the following scenes according to the normal shooting schedule without separate breaks to process their emotions. These factors created a clear difference compared to modern production processes, where scenes with sensitive content usually come with professional support measures for the actors, especially young actors. Number 18. The leech scene in Stand By Me was performed with real leeches instead of using complete fake effects. During filming, the leeches were placed directly on the actors' bodies to capture real reactions in a natural environment. There was no full coverage simulation layer and no replacement with props for most of the scene's duration. The actors had to have direct contact with the leeches under real filming conditions, including water, mud, and natural terrain. Some reactions that appeared in the scene, including flinching, changes in facial expression, and bodily reflexes, occurred right at the moment of contact and were not pre-staged according to specific rhythms. The crew only used fake leeches in some special frames, mainly when position control or higher safety requirements for the actors were needed. Most of the scenes still preserve the real interaction between the actors and the environment. Filming this scene was not done in a single take. The crew had to shoot it multiple times to achieve the necessary camera angles and composition, which meant the actors had to repeat the process of contact with the leeches in many different takes. Each take was prepared with a quantity of real leeches placed again on the actors' bodies in similar positions to ensure continuity between scenes. Close-up angles were used to capture the detailed movement of the leeches and the skin's reaction, while wide angles kept the entire setting. The entire scene was kept intact in the final cut with minimal editing and without using visual effects to completely replace the real elements. Number 17. The crying scene of Gordy in Stand By Me was not created through ordinary acting. Before the shooting day, director Rob Reiner separated Wil Wheaton from the rest of the crew. There was no script, there was no technical direction. The issue brought up was Wheaton's personal life, it was family, it was the feeling of being abandoned. It was not receiving attention from his parents for a long time. These details did not appear in the script. The conversation took place right before the camera started rolling. There was no psychological preparation step. When the scene began, the reaction appeared immediately. The tears were not created by technique. There was no glycerin. What appeared on screen was a direct reaction from personal memories that had just been stirred up. The crew kept the entire scene in the final cut. After the film was released, Wheaton confirmed that the crying scene was tied to his real experience at the time of filming. This method was not part of the standard procedure when working with young actors. There was no clear consent before applying it. This was a form of directly exploiting personal experience to create a cinematic effect. A method rarely made public, a technique that created a very high level of realism, but came with great risk. In the case of Stand By Me, Gordy's crying scene became one of the most memorable moments of the movie because the entire emotion in it was real, not constructed by any traditional acting method. Number 16. The role of Chris Chambers in Stand By Me was prepared by River Phoenix through a research process focused on the character's social circumstances. Chris was a capable boy, but stigmatized because of his family background, and Phoenix spent time studying how children in similar situations were treated in real life. He observed behavior, communication styles, and how others reacted to individuals considered problematic. The focus of the preparation was the feeling of being prejudged, being shaped by the living environment, and the pressure to prove one's own worth. Phoenix also spent a lot of time thinking about class injustice and how an individual could have limited opportunities simply because of family circumstances. During filming, Phoenix maintained a stable psychological state in an inward and focused direction, suitable for the character Chris Chambers. Some crew members noted that he maintained a serious work style, with little interaction outside of shooting scenes, and kept a high level of concentration throughout the production. After completing the scenes, this psychological state was still maintained for a period of time, reflecting the continuity between the preparation process and the performance of the role. Phoenix's performance in the film was kept with very little editing because the level of realism fit the director's vision. The role of Chris Chambers was later highly praised for the combination of social research and the ability to maintain a consistent psychological state throughout the filming process. Number 15. The character Chris Chambers in Stand By Me was built as a boy who had a clear awareness of the world around him, but was held back by his family background and the bad reputation that already existed. Chris understood how people saw him, understood how society categorized people based on family, and constantly had to face being judged without a chance to change. In real life, River Phoenix grew up in a completely unstable environment. His family moved continuously between different areas with no fixed home for many years, living in financially precarious conditions and constantly having to adapt to new environments. Phoenix did not experience a normal structured childhood, but had early exposure to many different social circumstances, from poverty to street performing to make a living. These experiences appeared directly in the way he portrayed Chris Chambers, especially in how the character reacted to social pressure and the lack of trust from others. Chris did not act like a normal child, and Phoenix also did not approach the role by simplifying the emotions. Both showed awareness beyond their age, especially in dialogue segments about the future, responsibility, and one's place in society. After the movie was released, this role was quickly recognized as one of Phoenix's most authentic performances. River Phoenix died at the age of 23. And from then on, this role was often recalled as a rare case where the boundary between the character and the real person almost did not exist, with many details in the film directly reflecting what he had experienced in real life. Number 14. The bridge running scene in Stand By Me was shot entirely with a real train, without using CGI, without scale models, and without hidden protective layers behind the frame. The location was a narrow railroad bridge with no escape routes on either side, creating a single movement corridor. The train was controlled directly on the tracks, with speed reduced but still maintaining enough inertia and thrust to create real pressure as it approached. The train's departure time and the actors' positions were calculated precisely to the second, based on distance, speed, and bridge length. The actors had to start running at the exact designated time. If they were slower or faster, the safety distance would be broken. There were no safety harnesses in the main camera angles, no support points to hold on to, only the surface of the rails and narrow wooden planks to move on. As the train approached, the space behind them narrowed rapidly, forcing the actors to continuously accelerate to maintain distance. The crew did not use visual effects to enhance the sense of danger, but directly captured the real movement between the train and the humans in the same frame. Filming time was limited by the railroad's operating schedule, making each take require high precision. Wide camera angles captured the full length of the bridge and the train's movement, while close-up angles focused on footsteps, breathing rhythm, and the actors' reactions as the distance shortened. The physical pressure from the noise, vibration, and movement of the train appeared directly in the shot, creating immediate reactions on the actors' faces and bodies without any additional effects. Number 13. The character Teddy Duchamp in Stand By Me was portrayed with many details that matched Corey Feldman's personal experiences. Teddy was a boy with a violent father who had once caused serious injury to his own child and lived in an unstable family environment where aggressive behavior and psychological trauma appeared frequently. In real life, Feldman had shared multiple times about his troubled childhood, including the lack of protection and negative experiences in his living environment when he was young. During filming, Feldman did not need to rebuild all emotional reactions from scratch, but used his existing experiences directly to create Teddy's behavior. From the loud voice and explosive reactions to uncontrolled actions in some situations, the character Teddy was not softened or adjusted to fit the usual image of children, but kept the unstable and easily agitated state, reflecting a problematic living environment. These expressions appeared clearly in confrontation scenes, when Teddy shifted from a normal state to tension in a short time without needing a long transition. The director kept this portrayal without requesting a reduction in intensity because it fit the character-building direction. Feldman's performance as Teddy Duchamp was recognized as having a high level of real-life reflection, with most of the emotion coming from personal experience rather than trained acting technique. Number 12. During the production of Stand By Me, director Rob Reiner actively controlled the off-screen relationships of the cast to directly serve how the characters interacted on screen. Instead of letting the young actors develop completely natural relationships, Reiner arranged separate living and preparation times for small groups, limiting the level of contact between certain individuals during specific stages of the filming process. Not all actors had the opportunity to interact regularly outside of work hours, and the schedule was designed to create specific distances between group members. Some character pairs were kept further apart to maintain the feeling of not being completely close, while other pairs had more contact time to create clear bonding. This arrangement was not based on the script, but on an interaction directing strategy aimed at creating natural reactions rather than uniformity. When stepping into the shooting scenes, the actors brought the very relationship state that had been formed off-screen into the characters, thereby creating clear differences in eye contact. tone of voice and reactions. The director did not ask the actors to adjust to fit a common standard, but kept this diversity in the final cut. This method was used as a tool to control group dynamics, helping the relationships in the film not develop in a uniform direction, but maintain clear differences between the characters. Number 11. Many dialogue segments in Stand By Me did not appear in the original script, but were formed directly during the filming process. Director Reiner allowed the young actors to react naturally in some scenes instead of requiring them to stick strictly to every written line. When the camera was rolling, the conversations between the characters were not limited by a fixed structure, and the actors could change the way they spoke, add details, or react in their own way. These dialogues were not rehearsed beforehand in a standard form, but arose right at the moment of interaction, based on the specific situation of the scene. Some improvised lines were kept, because they fit the rhythm of the scene and did not disrupt the story flow. This approach created dialogue segments with uneven rhythm, natural pauses, overlapping speech and reactions, similar to the way children communicate in real life. The director did not require synchronization of tone between the actors, resulting in each character maintaining their own distinct way of speaking without being adjusted to a common style. In the editing process, many scenes that did not follow the original script were still kept intact, rather than being reshot for correction. Some dialogues were longer than expected, some ended earlier than in the script, but they were still included in the final cut because they accurately reflected the interaction between the characters at the time of filming. This method reduced dependence on standard dialogue and shifted the focus to direct reactions, helping the conversations in the film feel everyday and without signs of pre-written script. Number 10. During internal test screenings, Stand By Me received mixed reactions from audiences. Some viewers felt the movie lacked a clear climax according to traditional structure, as the story did not build a big peak in action or conflict, but focused on a chain of interactions and dialogues between the characters. The film's pace was slow, with many extended segments of continuous conversations and no quick transitions to dramatic situations. Some audiences thought this approach did not create enough momentum to maintain tension throughout. In addition, the movie's themes included death, domestic violence, and abandonment, which were considered heavy for a film with a main cast of children at that time. The image of the body, dialogues about the future, and social prejudice created a serious tone that was uncommon in films with young actors during that period. After the test screenings, the studio considered adjusting the film's pacing, including shortening some dialogue segments, increasing the speed of scene transitions, and adding clearer guiding elements to create a stronger sense of climax. However, these changes were not made in the final cut. Director Reiner kept the original structure in which the story developed along a continuous journey without being divided into separate climax points. Number 9. The train bridge scene in Stand By Me was shot entirely at a real location without using models, without building a studio set, and without recreating it with visual effects. The location was a real railroad bridge with a high, long, and narrow structure, with space only for one set of tracks and small wooden planks as stepping points. There were no railings on either side and no flat surface to stand stably, only a large empty space below. The crew had to set up its own safety control system for the entire filming process, including determining standing positions, movement directions, and restricted areas for each actor in every scene. Markers were placed directly on the bridge to ensure the actors did not step outside the calculated safe zone. However, in some main camera angles, especially full body and wide shots, no safety harnesses were used to avoid revealing support equipment in the frame. The narrow terrain forced the actors to maintain continuous balance while moving, with no space to adjust wide steps or stop suddenly. Filming at the real location also meant the crew had to work under natural conditions, including lighting, weather, and the vibration of the bridge structure when affected by the environment. There was no additional base layer to reduce the height or create a more stable surface. The camera angles were arranged to take full advantage of the bridge's length and the space below, preserving the feeling of height and narrowness of the terrain. Number 8. Some dialogue in Stand By Me did not come entirely from the script, but directly reflected the actors' personal thoughts during filming. Director Rob Reiner allowed the actors to adjust the way they spoke and add details to the dialogue when necessary, rather than requiring them to repeat every written word exactly. In some dialogue scenes, especially those discussing family, the future, and one's own position, the actors incorporated phrasing close to their personal experiences, including word choice, speech rhythm, and response content. These lines were not prepared beforehand in a fixed form, but formed right during the interaction between the characters. Some segments carried content close to personal experience, especially in parts related to feeling judged, lack of support, or pressure from the surrounding environment. The director did not remove these details during editing, but kept them as part of the main dialogue structure. This led to clear differences between the characters and the way they express themselves, with no synchronization of tone or word usage, and created dialogue segments with uneven rhythm that reflected the natural way children communicate. During filming, some scenes were longer than expected because the actors continued responding after completing the main lines, and these extensions were kept if they fit the scene's flow. All dialogue segments with personal elements were included in the final cut, with minimal editing to maintain the authenticity of how the characters communicated. Number 7. The content of Stand By Me directly addressed issues such as domestic violence, abandonment, and social prejudice without softening or redirecting them toward entertainment elements. The character Teddy Duchamp was built with a past involving a violent father who had once caused serious injury to his own child, and this directly influenced Teddy's behavior throughout the movie, from his explosive reactions to his search for recognition. Gordy LaChance lived in a family where attention was completely focused on his deceased brother, leaving him neglected in daily life and without emotional care or recognition. Chris Chambers carried social prejudice tied to his family's bad reputation, leading to him being judged before having a chance to change his personal image. These elements were not presented as suggestions or metaphors, but appeared directly in the characters' dialogue and actions. The conversations addressed family circumstances straightforwardly, without using softened language or avoidance. No adult characters appeared to resolve or soften these issues in the main storyline. The story did not provide specific solutions for the situations, but kept the state of each character as they faced their own circumstances. The exploitation of these themes was maintained from beginning to end, without being altered to fit a resolving or balanced ending. Scenes related to family and society were not shortened or replaced with lighter content during editing, preserving the direct level of depiction. Number 6. After Stand By Me was completed, Stephen King watched the final cut and gave a direct assessment of the film's fidelity to the short story The Body. He did not focus on differences in plot details, but paid attention to how the movie recreated the emotions and psychology of the characters. According to King, the film version preserved the core spirit of the original work, especially in the way it portrayed the inner world of the main characters, including the feeling of abandonment, family pressure, and awareness of the future. The dialogues between the characters in the movie accurately reflected how they thought in the story, without being changed to fit a commercial film structure. The construction of Gordy LaChance in the film kept his role as an observer and recorder, similar to how the character was presented in the story. Chris Chambers was retained with all the elements of social prejudice and personal awareness, without being simplified into a usual positive model. King also noted that the movie did not remove the heavy psychological elements to lighten the content, but kept the direct dialogues about family, loss, and growing up. In later comments, King continued to mention Stand By Me as a typical example of an adaptation that focused on psychological content rather than changing the structure to suit the market. And he highly praised the way the film preserved the approach to the characters that he had built in The Body. Number 5. The story in Stand By Me was built in a direction different from the familiar climax structure of Hollywood cinema. The movie did not establish a central villain to drive the conflict, and there was no clear opposing character playing the main role in creating tension throughout. The conflict situations appeared individually, not linked into a single escalating chain leading to one explosive peak. Instead, the content was developed in the form of a journey, where the characters moved continuously and experienced many different situations without being bound by a specific climax goal. The focus was placed on the interactions between the characters, especially the long dialogues related to family, the future, and how they saw themselves. Elements such as the train scene, conflict with another group, or the discovery of the body were not treated as peaks, but existed as parts of a continuous chain of events. The movie's ending was presented in the form of a flashback from the adult character's perspective, without providing a specific solution for the conflicts that had appeared. There was no surprising twist or complete resolution, but only a recording of what had happened and how the characters had changed over time. Number 4. The focus of Stand By Me was not on an action goal but on the process of the characters growing up. The journey to find the body of a teenager only served as a guiding element, creating a reason for the characters to leave their familiar environment and step into the journey. This goal was not developed as a main task that had to be completed at all costs, but existed as a milestone for the story to continue moving. The main content of the movie focused on the change in the characters' awareness and psychology as they faced their personal circumstances and the surrounding environment. Elements such as family, social prejudice, the feeling of abandonment, and the pressure to grow up early were shown through conversations and reactions between the characters. A large portion of the film's runtime was devoted to dialogue segments rather than action or dramatic events. The conversations took place continuously throughout the journey, including topics about the future, fears, memories, and one's place in society. These segments were not shortened to increase the pace, but were kept intact to reflect the character's thought process. The change did not come from a single event, but accumulated through each small interaction. When the journey ended, what changed was not the external circumstances, but the way the characters saw themselves and the world around them. Number 3. The character Gordy Lachance in Stand By Me was built directly based on Stephen King's personal experiences during his childhood. Gordy appeared as a boy living in a family with a clear emotional distance, where attention was focused on his deceased brother, while he himself was almost overlooked in daily life. The construction of this family relationship reflected the family structure that King had described in many interviews and other works, where the feeling of being undervalued and lacking recognition played a central role in the psychological development process. In the short story The Body, Gordy was not only a character participating in the journey, but also the narrator looking back at the past from an adult perspective, and this element was preserved when adapted into the film. Gordy's storytelling carried a reflective quality, recording the details of events and emotions experienced, similar to the narrative voice King built in his literary works. The character's inner thoughts, especially those related to family, loss, and the search for one's own place, were taken directly from the experiences King had mentioned. There was no major change in transforming this character into the film version, including his role as an observer and recorder rather than a driver of action. Gordy was not built as an action character, but as the emotional center of the story, where events were recorded and reflected through a personal perspective. This structure allowed the story to retain its reflective form, with the adult character looking back at what had happened in the past, corresponding to the way King approached the original story when writing The Body. Number 2. The closing line of Stand By Me, "I never had any friends later on like the ones I had when I was 12, became one of the most quoted lines in cinema. The line appears at the end of the film, when the adult Gordy looks back at the journey in the past and summarizes his experience. The content of the line is not tied to a specific event in the plot, but is synthetic, reflecting the entire relationship between the characters throughout the journey. After the film's release, this line was widely used in film analysis articles, research materials on coming-of-age films, and many lists of memorable quotes. It was often quoted verbatim without changes and directly associated with the movie's imagery. The line also appeared in many media publications, reviews, and content related to the theme of childhood friendship as a typical example of how cinema expresses memories and change over time. The content of the line directly reflects the main theme of the film, focusing on the relationship between the characters during the transition from childhood to adulthood. Number 1. The content of Stand By Me was built around the end of childhood rather than an adventure in the traditional sense. The journey to find the body only served as a guiding factor, while the most important outcome lay in the change in the character's awareness after experiencing the chain of events. When the journey ended, there was no major change in the external circumstances, but the way the characters saw themselves and the world around them had become different from the starting point. The experiences throughout the trip, including facing death, family pressure, and social prejudice, created a shift in thinking and reactions for each person. After that event, the relationship between the characters was not maintained in its initial state. According to the ending narrated from the adult Gordy's perspective, the group members gradually drifted apart, no longer kept in regular contact, and went in different directions in life. The movie's storytelling used a reflective voice, with the narrator looking back at the past from a point many years later, placing the entire journey in the context of memory. There was no return to the initial state after the trip, no re-establishment of the friend group as before, but only a recording of a phase that had ended. This structure placed the focus on the process of transition from childhood to adulthood, in which the journey served as a turning point rather than the main goal of the story. When looking back at Stand By Me as a whole, the movie not only recorded a simple journey, but recreated an important transitional phase in every person's life. The events that occurred during the trip did not create immediate changes in external circumstances, but left long-lasting effects on the way the characters saw themselves and the world around them. From the conversations, the small conflicts, to the moment of facing death, all contributed to forming a new awareness of friendship, family, and the future. Over time, the characters did not keep their relationships as before. Each went in a different direction, reflecting the natural change that comes with growing up. The way the movie ended with a reflective perspective placed the entire story at a sufficient time distance to look back clearly and fully. What remained was not the action or the result of the trip, but the memory of a time that could not be repeated. The details in the film were kept in a realistic direction, not adjusted to create a resolving ending, but only recorded a phase that had passed. If you found these facts interesting, don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next videos. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next explorations.